The waves crashed relentlessly against the English coast. As General Dwight David Eisenhower stood at the window of Southwick House, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, outside, the storm that had been battering southern England for 3 days showed no signs of abating. It was June 4th, 1944, and the fate of the free world hung in the balance of a weather forecast. Operation Overlord, the largest amphibious invasion in human history, had been postponed once already. 156,000 Allied troops waited in camps, aboard ships, and in staging areas across southern England, their morale hanging by a thread. Every hour of delay increased the risk of discovery by German intelligence, and Eisenhower knew that Hitler's Atlantic Wall grew stronger with each passing day. The roots of this moment stretched back to January 1943, when Allied leaders had met at the Casablanca Conference. Winston Churchill, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and their military advisors had debated the merits of a cross-channel invasion versus continued operations in the Mediterranean. The Americans, led by General George Catlett Marshall, argued forcefully for a direct assault on Nazi-occupied Europe. Churchill, scarred by memories of the Great War's bloodbaths, preferred what he called the soft underbelly approach through Italy and the Balkans. Roosevelt ultimately sided with his generals, and the decision was made to launch the Second Front that Stalin had been demanding since 1941. The Soviet leader had grown increasingly bitter about bearing the brunt of German military might, while his Western allies fought what he considered sideshow campaigns in North Africa and Italy. According to Stephen Ambrose's definitive account, in D-Day, June 6, 1944, the planning phase consumed 18 months and involved unprecedented coordination between British, American, and Canadian forces. The appointment of Eisenhower as Supreme Allied Commander in December 1943 had been a masterstroke of coalition politics. Though he lacked combat experience compared to rivals like General Harold Alexander or General George Smith Patton Jr., Eisenhower possessed the diplomatic skills necessary to manage the egos and national interests of the Allied partnership. Working alongside him was a remarkable team of military minds. General Bernard Law Montgomery, the hero of El Alamein, commanded all ground forces for the initial assault. Air Chief Marshal Trafford Lee Mallory controlled the massive air armada, while Admiral Bertram Home Ramsey oversaw the naval component, the largest fleet ever assembled. The deception campaign, codenamed Operation Fortitude, had been running for months. Dummy armies, false radio traffic, and carefully leaked intelligence convinced the Germans that the invasion would come at Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the English Channel. General Patton, temporarily disgraced after the slapping incidents in Sicily, played his part by commanding the fictitious 1st United States Army Group, complete with inflatable tanks and fake installations visible to German reconnaissance aircraft. Meanwhile, the real target, the beaches of Normandy, had been chosen after exhaustive analysis. The coast offered 5 suitable landing areas, codenamed Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. Each presented unique challenges, from the cliff-dominated approaches at Omaha to the heavily fortified positions overlooking Utah Beach. As Eisenhower contemplated the storm raging outside, he knew that weather would be the final arbiter of Operation Overlord's timing. Group Captain James Martin Stagg, the chief meteorologist, had painted a grim picture earlier that evening. The low-pressure system showed no signs of moving, and the seas remained rough for the smaller landing craft. The weight of command pressed heavily upon Eisenhower's shoulders as he prepared for the most crucial decision of his military career. The meeting convened at 4:15 in the morning on June 5, 1944, in the map room at Southwick House. The key commanders of Operation Overlord gathered around a large table, covered with meteorological charts and tactical maps. The atmosphere was thick with cigarette smoke and tension as Group Captain Stagg stepped forward to deliver his weather briefing. "Gentlemen," Stagg began, his Scottish accent cutting through the silence, "I have some encouraging news. Our latest data suggests a brief window of improved conditions beginning late on June 5th and lasting through June 6th. General Montgomery leaned forward, his sharp eyes studying the weather charts. "How brief, Stagg, and how improved?" "The wind should drop to 15 to 20 knots, with cloud cover breaking enough for air operations. The seas will still be rough, but manageable for our larger vessels." Stagg paused, knowing the weight of his words. "However, this window will close rapidly by June 7th. We'll see a return to storm conditions that could last for days." "Admiral," Ramsey spoke up, his naval experience evident in his measured tone. What about the small craft? My landing ship's tank and landing craft infantry will be taking a beating in these seas. They'll manage, sir, though it won't be comfortable for the men aboard them. Eisenhower sat silently, absorbing every detail. The original invasion date had been June 5th, but the storms had forced a 24-hour postponement. Now they faced another crucial decision: launch on June 6th with marginal weather, or postpone again and risk losing the element of surprise. Entirely the tides presented additional complications. The assault required a rising tide that would carry landing craft over German beach obstacles, combined with enough daylight for naval gunfire support and air operations. These conditions would not occur again for 2 weeks, and by then, German defenses might have discovered the massive Allied buildup. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding Army Group B responsible for coastal defense, had been strengthening the Atlantic Wall throughout the spring of 1944. His inspection tours had resulted in hundreds of thousands of additional obstacles, mines, and fortifications along the French coast. Intelligence reports suggested he was planning to return from his wife's birthday celebration in Germany on June 6th, a detail that could work in the Allies' favor. Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory expressed concerns about his bomber crews operating in marginal weather conditions. The preliminary bombardment plan called for 13,000 aircraft to soften German defenses. Before the landings, poor visibility could result in bombs falling short, potentially devastating Allied troops gathering on the beaches. General Omar Nelson Bradley, commanding the 1st United States Army, had spent weeks studying aerial photographs of Omaha Beach. The intelligence painted a sobering picture: extensive minefields, concrete bunkers, and interlocking fields of fire that could turn the landing into a slaughter. Weather delays would only give the Germans more time to reinforce these positions. The dramatic weather briefings at Southwick House have been extensively documented in Gordon Harrison's official history cross-channel attack, which remains the definitive account of D-Day planning. At Berchtesgaden, Adolf Hitler remained convinced that the invasion would target Pas-de-Calais. His Atlantic Wall directive of March 19th, 44 had concentrated the strongest defenses there, including the 15th Army under General Hans von Samuth. The German weather services, lacking access to Atlantic weather stations captured by the Allies, failed to predict the brief clearing that Stagg had identified. As the morning briefing concluded, Eisenhower requested time to consider the options. The machinery of Operation Overlord had been set in motion. Convoys were already at sea. Paratroopers were preparing for their missions, and resistance networks across France had been activated. Calling off the invasion now would require extraordinary justification. The Supreme Commander walked outside into the pre-dawn darkness, feeling the wind that had plagued the operation for days. In a few hours, he would have to make the decision that would determine whether June 6, 1944, would mark the beginning of Nazi Germany's end, or become another postponement in a war's long struggle. The fate of millions hung in the balance of Atlantic weather patterns and one man's judgment. At 9:30 on the evening of June 4, 1944, Eisenhower reconvened his commanders for the most crucial meeting of the war. The storm outside Southwick House continued to rage, but Group Captain Stagg's latest forecasts offered a glimmer of hope that would change the course of history. The situation has improved marginally, Stagg reported, pointing to the latest weather charts spread across the conference table. The low-pressure system is moving faster than initially predicted. We should see clearing conditions beginning late tomorrow, June 5th, and continuing through June 6th. General Montgomery, ever aggressive, seized upon the opportunity. This may be our best chance, Supreme Commander. Every day we delay strengthens Jerry's hand. But Admiral Ramsey remained cautious about naval operations in rough seas. My concern is for the smaller craft. We'll lose landing vessels in these conditions, and seasick troops won't fight effectively. Air Chief Marshal Lee Mallory worried about visibility for his massive air armada. If cloud cover remains heavy, we risk bombing our own forces. The margin for error is minimal. Eisenhower absorbed each concern while weighing factors beyond weather. Ultra-intercepts had revealed increased German patrol activity along the coast. Field Marshal von Rundstedt, commanding Army Group West, had begun moving reserve divisions closer to potential landing sites. Most critically, the complex tidal calculations meant that postponing beyond June 6th would require waiting until June 19th, nearly 2 weeks that could prove fatal to operational security. The human cost weighed heavily on everyone's minds. 136,000 men would cross the channel in the initial assault, with thousands more in follow-up waves. Intelligence estimates suggested casualty rates could reach 10% or higher, particularly at Omaha Beach where the terrain favored defenders. General Bradley had grown increasingly concerned about Omaha during the final planning phases. Unlike the British beaches, which benefited from specialized armor and extensive naval support, the American sector faced the most formidable German defenses. The 352nd Infantry Division had recently reinforced the area, with experienced troops transferred from the Eastern Front. Cornelius Rhine's masterwork The Longest Day captures the agonizing nature of Eisenhower's decision, based on extensive interviews with participants from both sides. At Rommel's headquarters in La Roche-Guyon, the German commander had departed for his wife's birthday. Confident that the continuing storms made invasion impossible, his absence would prove critical, as subordinate commanders lacked authority to deploy reserve forces without higher approval. The rigid German command structure, designed to prevent coup attempts, would work against them when rapid response became essential. The French resistance had been alerted through coded BBC broadcasts that invasion was imminent. Messages like, "The dice are cast," and "It is hot in Suez" activated sabotage networks throughout occupied France. Thousands of resistance fighters prepared to cut railway lines, destroy communications, and harass German reinforcements moving toward the coast. As midnight approached, Eisenhower requested a final private consultation with his closest advisors. The burden of command had never felt heavier as he contemplated sending young men to their deaths. Based on a weather forecast, he thought of the letter he had already prepared, taking full responsibility if Operation Overlord failed. The troops, the air, and the Navy did all that bravery and devotion to duty could do. If any blame or fault attaches to the attempt, it is mine alone. At 2:15 on the morning of June 5th, Eisenhower made his decision. Looking around the room at his commanders, he spoke the words that would launch the largest military operation in history. "Okay, let's go." The machinery of war immediately shifted into high gear. Coded messages flashed across radio networks, alerting commanders throughout southern England. Naval convoys altered course toward Normandy, while airborne divisions received final briefings for their pre-dawn missions. After months of planning and preparation, Operation Overlord was finally underway. By dawn on June 5th, the invasion fleet had begun its movement across the English Channel. There would be no turning back now. The liberation of Western Europe had begun with a calculated gamble on Atlantic weather patterns. At 11:30 on the night of June 5th, 1944, the droning of aircraft engines filled the darkness above southern England. 822 C-47 transport planes and 104 gliders carried the advance guard of Operation Overlord toward their destiny in Normandy. Leading this aerial armada were the men of the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions, along with British 6th Airborne Division. Elite paratroopers tasked with securing vital objectives behind enemy lines. Colonel James Earl, rudder of the 2nd Ranger Battalion, had volunteered his men for one of the war's most dangerous missions, scaling the 100-foot cliffs at Point du Hoc to silence German artillery that could devastate the landings at Omaha Beach. Intelligence reports indicated that 6 155mm guns, positioned in concrete casemates, commanded both Utah and Omaha beaches. Eliminating these weapons was crucial to the invasion's success. The Pathfinders had jumped first, dropping into Normandy at 12:15 to mark landing zones with radar beacons and signal lights. Among them was Lieutenant Colonel Edward Charles Cross of the 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Carrying an American flag, he had flown over Naples. Cross had promised to raise it over the first French town liberated by American forces. Sergeant John Ray of the 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment recalled years later how his C-47 bucked and weaved through German anti-aircraft fire as it approached Drop Zone Charlie. The whole sky lit up with tracers and flak bursts. Jerry knew we were coming, but he didn't know where we were going. The German response had been swift, but confused. General Erich Marx, commanding the 84th Corps, was celebrating his birthday at his headquarters in Saint-La when reports of paratrooper landings began flooding in. Without clear intelligence about Allied intentions, German commanders struggled to distinguish between the main assault and diversionary operations. Stephen Ambrose's band of brothers provides vivid first-hand accounts of the paratroop operations. based on extensive interviews with Easy Company veterans of the 500th and 6th Parachute Infantry Regiment. Major John Howard's British glider force achieved one of the war's most remarkable tactical successes, landing within yards of the Caen Canal Bridge at Benouville. The operation, codenamed Dead Stick, required pinpoint navigation in darkness to seize intact bridges that German forces planned to destroy to prevent a loud breakout from the beachhead. Howard's Ox and Buck's light infantry landed in 3-horse gliders at 16 minutes past midnight, surprising German sentries who had grown complacent during months of quiet occupation duty. Within 10 minutes, both the Canal Bridge and nearby Orne River Bridge were in British hands, earning the canal crossing its eternal nickname, Pegasus Bridge. The American paratroopers faced greater challenges due to scattered drops caused by heavy cloud cover and intense anti-aircraft fire. Many units landed miles from their intended zones, with some paratroopers scattered across 20 miles of Norman countryside. This dispersion, while tactically disastrous, paradoxically benefited the overall operation by confusing German defenders about Allied intentions. Private John Steele of the 82nd Airborne became an unwilling icon when his parachute caught on the church steeple in St. Mary-Église, feigning death for hours while German soldiers searched the area below. Steele eventually cut himself free and rejoined his unit. His predicament would later inspire scenes in the film The Longest Day. Colonel Edward Cross reached St. Mary-Église at 4:30 in the morning, making it the first French town liberated by American forces. True to his promise, he raised his Naples flag over the town hall while German artillery continued to shell the area. The sight of the stars and stripes flying over French soil provided powerful symbolism for the liberation that was beginning. The British 6th Airborne Division faced the critical mission of securing the eastern flank of the invasion area. Their objectives included destroying bridges over the Diaz River to prevent German reinforcements from reaching the beaches and capturing the Merville Battery, whose guns threatened Sword Beach. Lieutenant Colonel Terence Otway's 9th Parachute Battalion drew the dangerous assignment of assaulting the Merville Battery. Intelligence indicated that for concrete casemates housed large-caliber guns capable of enfilading Sword Beach, the position was surrounded by barbed wire, minefields, and machine gun nests defended by approximately 200 German troops. Otway's battalion had been scattered during the drop, with only 150 men reaching the assembly point instead of the planned 600. Gliders carrying heavy equipment had missed their landing zones, leaving the paratroopers without anti-tank guns, mortars, and Bangalore torpedoes needed to breach the fortifications. Despite these setbacks, Otway decided to proceed with the assault. At 4:30 in the morning, his reduced force launched a desperate attack against the battery. The assault succeeded after brutal hand-to-hand fighting, though casualties were severe. When the paratroopers examined their prize, they discovered that the heavy guns were actually obsolete Czech weapons of limited range. But the mission had prevented any interference. With the beach landings as dawn approached on June 6th, the airborne divisions had achieved most of their objectives despite scattered drops and heavy casualties. The Pathfinders had marked drop zones, vital bridges were secured or destroyed as planned, and German reserves remained confused about Allied intentions. The stage was set for the main event, the largest amphibious assault in military history. As the first pale light of dawn crept across the English Channel on June 6, 1944, the greatest armada in naval history approached the coast of Normandy. Operation Neptune, the naval component of Overlord, had deployed nearly 7,000 vessels ranging from massive battleships to tiny landing craft. Admiral Bertram Ramsay's fleet stretched across 50 miles of gray, choppy water, carrying the hopes of the free world toward Hitler's Atlantic Wall. The preliminary bombardment began at 5:50 in the morning when HMS Warspite, veteran of Jutland and countless Mediterranean battles, opened fire on German positions near Gold Beach. Her 15-inch guns, joined by those of 5 other battleships, 23 cruisers, and 7 destroyers, unleashed a thunderous barrage designed to shatter German morale and destroy coastal fortifications. Colonel Russell Red Reeder of the 12th Infantry Regiment, 1st Infantry Division, watched the naval gunfire from his landing craft approaching Omaha Beach. The whole coastline seemed to erupt in smoke and flame. We could see the shells exploding on the bluffs above the beach, and for a moment we thought this might be easier than expected. That optimism would prove tragically misplaced. The Omaha Beach sector, defended by elements of the veteran 352nd Infantry Division, presented the most formidable obstacles of any landing area. Unlike intelligence estimates suggesting second-rate troops, these were experienced soldiers commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Wilhelm Meyer, who had prepared extensive defenses. During months of relative quiet, the German positions at Omaha occupied ideal defensive terrain. Concrete bunkers and machine gun nests dotted the bluffs overlooking the beach, with interlocking fields of fire that can sweep the entire landing area. Barbed wire, mines, and steel obstacles created a deadly maze for attacking forces, while artillery positioned inland could deliver devastating enfilade fire. Omar Bradley's memoir A Soldier's Story provides stark insight into the near disaster. At Omaha Beach, where American casualties mounted rapidly in the face of unexpectedly fierce resistance. At Utah Beach, the situation developed more favorably for American forces. The 4th Infantry Division, led by Brigadier General Theodore Roosevelt Jr., son of the former president, landed approximately 2,000 yards south of their intended target. Due to strong currents, Roosevelt, at 56 the oldest officer to land on D-Day, made the crucial decision to start the war from right here rather than attempt to relocate to the original landing site. Roosevelt's decision proved inspired. The new landing area faced lighter opposition than the heavily fortified original target, and his calm leadership under fire earned him the Medal of Honor. By noon, the 4th Infantry Division had established solid contact with paratroopers from the 101st Airborne Division, creating the first successful link between airborne and seaborne forces. On the British and Canadian sectors, Gold, Juno, and Sword Beaches, specialized armor made crucial differences in overcoming German defenses. The 79th Armored Division, known as Hobart's Funnies after their eccentric commander Major General Percy Hobart, deployed ingenious devices including swimming Sherman tanks, flail tanks for clearing mines and bridge-laying vehicles. Major William Steele Brownlee of the Staffordshire Yeomanry commanded one of the first swimming tanks to reach Gold Beach. The sight of those German bunkers was sobering, but our 75mm guns could penetrate their embrasures. We had the range advantage they weren't expecting. The Canadian 3rd Infantry Division faced fierce resistance at Juno Beach, where German strongpoints had survived the preliminary bombardment largely intact. The Regiment de la Chaudière and Royal Winnipeg Rifles fought house-to-house battles in the resort town of Courseulles-sur-Mer, gradually overwhelming German defenders through superior numbers and determination. At Sword Beach, British forces achieved the deepest penetration of D-Day, with elements of the 3rd Infantry Division advancing to within 3 miles of Caen. However, their failure to capture this crucial transportation hub on the first day would lead to months of bitter fighting in the Norman Bocage. The most dramatic individual action of D-Day occurred at Point du Hoc, where Colonel Rudder's Rangers scaled 100-foot cliffs under intense German fire, using rocket-fired ropes and extension ladders borrowed from London Fire Brigade. The Rangers achieved their seemingly impossible objective. However, they discovered that the 6 155mm guns they had come to destroy were wooden decoys. The real weapons had been moved inland weeks earlier. Despite this disappointment, the Rangers' heroic assault served a vital strategic purpose by preventing German forces from using Point du Hoc as an observation post to direct artillery fire against the beaches. The Rangers held their precarious position for 2 days against fierce counterattacks, suffering over 50% casualties in the process. As evening approached on June 6th, the outcome of Operation Overlord remained uncertain. While 5 beachheads had been established, none had achieved their D-Day objectives completely. The greatest concern remained at Omaha Beach, where General Bradley had seriously considered evacuating forces during the afternoon crisis. Only individual acts of heroism by soldiers like Sergeant Frank Pergori and Colonel George Taylor, who famously declared there are 2 kinds of people staying on this beach, the dead and those who are going to die, had turned the tide. By nightfall, approximately 156,000 Allied troops were ashore in Normandy, but at a cost of over 4,000 casualties. The longest day had ended with the Atlantic Wall breached, but the hardest fighting still lay ahead. As the sun set on June 6, 1944, the beaches of Normandy resembled scenes from Dante's Inferno. Burning landing craft littered the shoreline, while medics worked frantically to treat thousands of wounded soldiers. Despite the carnage, the Atlantic Wall, Hitler's vaunted fortress Europe, had been irreparably breached. The question now was whether Allied forces could exploit their precarious foothold. Before German reserves launched devastating counterattacks, General Omar Bradley stood on the deck of USS Augusta, studying reports from his beach commanders with growing concern. At Omaha Beach, his forces controlled barely 1 mile of territory, far short of the planned objectives. Casualties exceeded initial estimates, with some companies suffering 90% losses. During the morning assault, the narrow beach head remained vulnerable to German artillery positioned on the commanding bluffs. Colonel Charles Canham of the 29th Infantry Division had rallied survivors of the morning disaster through sheer force of personality. Despite wounds to his hand and leg, Canham led small groups of soldiers in scaling the bluffs through gaps in German defenses. His famous exhortation, "They're murdering us here. Let's move inland and get murdered, capture the desperate," courage required to break the deadlock. The German reaction had been fatally delayed by command confusion and Hitler's personal intervention. Field Marshal von Rundstedt had requested permission to deploy the 12th SS Panzer Division, Hitler Youth and Panzer Lehr Division against the beachheads at dawn. However, Hitler, who rarely rose before noon, had forbidden any movement of strategic reserves without his personal approval. This delay proved catastrophic for German defense plans. By the time Hitler finally authorized the release of armored reserves, at 4 in the afternoon, Allied air supremacy had made daylight movement virtually impossible. The panzer divisions were forced to wait for darkness before beginning their approach to Normandy, losing precious hours that could have been decisive. Max Hastings' comprehensive study Overlord, D-Day, and the Battle for Normandy details how command paralysis in the German High Command contributed significantly to Allied success. At Sword Beach, British forces had achieved the most impressive penetration of D-Day, with reconnaissance elements of the Staffordshire Yeomanry reaching the outskirts of Caen by evening. However, their isolated position made them vulnerable to counterattack by the 21st Panzer Division, the only major German armored unit to engage Allied forces on June 6th. The counterattack came at 4 in the afternoon when 40 tanks of the 21st Panzer Division struck the gap between Juno and Sword Beaches. Led by Colonel Hermann von Oppeln-Brnikowski, the German force initially achieved tactical surprise, reaching the coast and temporarily severing communications between British beachheads. However, the attack lacked sufficient infantry support and faced devastating intervention by Allied aircraft. Flight Lieutenant Pierre Klosterman of the Free French Air Force described the scene. "The German tanks were like sitting ducks on the open ground. Our Typhoons made pass after pass with rockets and cannon fire until the entire column was burning." The failure of the 21st Panzer Division's counterattack marked the last realistic opportunity for German forces to drive the Allies back into the sea. By nightfall, the 5 beachheads were beginning to link up, creating a continuous front approximately 24 miles wide and varying from 1 to 6 miles deep. General Montgomery had established his headquarters in a caravan near Cruelly, maintaining his trademark calm despite the day's mixed results. While none of the major D-Day objectives had been fully achieved, Caen remained in German hands, and the beachheads were shallower than planned. The fundamental strategic goal had been accomplished. Hitler's Atlantic Wall would never again present an impregnable barrier to Allied operations. The French civilian population had endured a terrible ordeal during the bombardment and fighting. The town of Caen suffered devastating air attacks that killed hundreds of residents, while coastal villages were reduced to rubble. However, most French civilians welcomed the Allies as liberators. Despite the destruction accompanying their arrival, Marie-Louise Osment, a teacher in the village of Perrier-sur-Ladan, recorded in her diary, "The noise was indescribable. Cannon fire, machine guns, aircraft everywhere. But when I saw the first British soldier walking down our street, I knew that a long nightmare was finally ending." Colonel Rudder's Rangers continued to hold their precarious position atop Point Duhok, despite fierce German counterattacks and dwindling ammunition supplies. The discovery that their primary targets, the heavy coastal guns, were wooden decoys had been disappointing, but patrols located the real weapons hidden in an orchard 1 mile inland. Thermite grenades quickly rendered the guns useless, completing the Rangers' mission despite the earlier deception. As darkness fell over Normandy, both sides prepared for the crucial battles ahead. German commanders recognized that their failure to crush the invasion on the beaches meant a prolonged campaign that would favor Allied industrial superiority. Field Marshal Rommel, rushing back from Germany upon learning of the landings, grimly observed that the fate of Germany will be decided on the beaches of Normandy. For the Allies, June 6 had demonstrated both the potential and limitations of amphibious warfare against prepared defenses, while the Atlantic Wall had been breached. The cost in casualties and the narrow margin of success served as sobering reminders of the challenges that lay ahead in liberating Western Europe. The longest day had ended, but the longest campaign was just beginning. The gray dawn of June 7, 1944, revealed the magnitude of what had been accomplished in a single day. That changed the course of human history. Across 5 beaches in Normandy, 156,000 Allied soldiers had shattered Hitler's Atlantic Wall and established the Second Front that Stalin had demanded for 3 years. The success of Operation Overlord would ultimately seal Nazi Germany's fate. Though months of brutal fighting still lay ahead, General Dwight Eisenhower toured the beachheads on June 7th, witnessing firsthand the controlled chaos of the largest military operation ever mounted. Supply ships queued offshore, while engineers worked frantically to clear beach obstacles and construct temporary harbors. Despite the previous day's mixed results, the Supreme Commander recognized that the fundamental strategic objective had been achieved. Hitler's fortress Europe was no longer impregnable. The human cost of D-Day became clearer as casualty reports reached Allied headquarters. Total losses approached 10,000 killed, wounded, and missing, with American forces bearing the heaviest burden due to the disaster at Omaha Beach. The 2nd and 5th Ranger Battalions suffered over 50% casualties, while some rifle companies in the 1st and 29th Infantry Divisions were virtually destroyed. German casualties were lighter in absolute numbers, but represented irreplaceable losses of experienced coastal defense troops. The 352nd Infantry Division, which had fought so effectively at Omaha Beach, was shattered as an effective fighting force. More critically, the Luftwaffe had managed only 319 sorties against the invasion fleet, a pitiful response that demonstrated German air power's complete collapse. John Keegan's masterful analysis, 6 Armies in Normandy, places D-Day within the broader context of the campaign that followed, showing how the successful landing enabled the eventual liberation of Western Europe. The strategic deception operations proved their worth in the days following D-Day. Operation Fortitude continued to convince German high command that Normandy was merely a diversion, with the main assault still to come at Pas-de-Calais. This belief kept the powerful 15th Army immobilized throughout the critical build-up period. When their intervention might have proved decisive, General Patton remained in England with his fictitious 1st United States Army Group, unknowingly playing his greatest role in the war through inaction. German intelligence continued to track his movements, convinced that this aggressive commander would lead the real invasion. The deception held for weeks, allowing Allied forces to establish an unshakable foothold in Normandy. The French resistance had performed magnificently during the invasion, cutting railway lines and disrupting German communications throughout occupied France. The Special Operations Executive reported over 1,000 acts of sabotage during the first 48 hours of Overlord, significantly hampering German efforts to rush reinforcements to Normandy. Hitler's reaction to the landings revealed the extent of his detachment from military reality. Initially dismissing the assault as a feint, he refused to authorize the movement of strategic reserves until the afternoon of June 6th. Even then, he continued to believe that Pas-de-Calais remained the primary target, keeping his strongest forces immobilized while Normandy burned. Field Marshal Rommel's absence during the crucial opening hours proved fatal to German defensive plans. His dynamic leadership might have coordinated a more effective immediate response, though the overwhelming Allied advantages in air power and naval gunfire support would likely have prevailed regardless. The Desert Fox returned to France on the evening of June 6th to find his Atlantic Wall irreparably breached. The technological innovations demonstrated on D-Day presaged the future of warfare. The Mulberry Artificial Harbors, Pluto Pipeline, and specialized armor of the 79th Armored Division showed how engineering ingenuity could overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles. These innovations would influence military planning for decades to come. For the soldiers who survived D-Day, the experience remained vivid throughout their lives. Technical Sergeant John Robert Slaughter of the 29th Infantry Division, who survived the carnage at Omaha Beach, later reflected, "We went ashore knowing that many of us wouldn't see another sunset, but we also knew that freedom itself was at stake, and that knowledge gave us the strength to do what seemed impossible." The success of Operation Overlord marked the beginning of Nazi Germany's final collapse. Within 11 months, Hitler would be dead in his Berlin bunker, and the Third Reich would surrender unconditionally. The Second Front that opened on June 6, 1944, ensured that Soviet forces would not liberate Western Europe alone, fundamentally shaping the post-war world. The beaches of Normandy, soaked with the blood of heroes from dozen nations, became sacred ground commemorating humanity's triumph over tyranny. The American cemetery at Colville-sur-Mer, overlooking Omaha Beach, contains the graves of 9,387 soldiers who died liberating Europe. Each white cross and Star of David represents dreams unfulfilled, but also freedom preserved for future generations. D-Day demonstrated that free peoples, united in common cause, could overcome any tyranny regardless of its apparent strength. The courage displayed on the beaches of Normandy, from the paratroopers who jumped into darkness to the rangers who scaled impossible cliffs, proved that the human spirit could triumph over the most formidable obstacles. As General Eisenhower wrote in his victory message, the free men of the world marched together to victory. June 6, 1944, would forever stand as testament to that truth. The longest day that changed the world.